are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to another National Road Safety and Partnership Program. Our webinar today is how telematics can improve driver behaviour and safety culture. And there's me. My name is Jerome Carslake. I manage the NRSVP and its many activities. So to find out more, please visit the NRSVP website, and I recommend signing up to the newsletter, and you can be kept abreast of everything that's coming up. So today's session is going to go for approximately 60 minutes. We're going to have plenty of time for discussion throughout. We're going to be recording it, and it will be shared on the NRSVP website afterwards, as will the slides. Claire is kind enough to say, look, when someone fires through a good question, we'll be able to grab it where needed. And if necessary, we may hold some of them through if it relates to later on in the slide session. So as I mentioned, we love to have input and to have questions go in. So if this is your first webinar, please add your questions in here, type them into the box. If you can keep them short, sharp and sweet, we can certainly ask them a lot easier. So today we're lucky to have Claire Kay, National WHS Manager with Southern Cross Protection. Welcome to you, Claire.
Hello, how are you?
Excellent.
Nice to be here, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to have you online today, Claire. So for those who don't know Claire, she is the National Safety Manager at the Southern Cross Protection, a position she's held since November of 2013. Claire was employed as the company's first safety professional, and as part of her initial gap analysis, identified vehicle crashes as a significant risk for the company. Since then, the vehicle safety has remained a major focus in SXP safety strategy, including the use of telematics as a lead indicator of driver safety and vehicle driving monitoring tools. So, and the best thing is today, all the impact we'll see is what Claire has accomplished in her time since 2013. Over to you, Claire, and welcome.
Okay, thanks, Jerome. Actually, look, it's been a great opportunity to look back at what things were like when I first started at the company and what they're like now. And I guess it's just reinforced for me that that culture change and the way we do things around here is achievable and doable, but it doesn't happen overnight, that's for sure. Look, Southern Cross Protection is a national security firm. We've got a number of different functions, but one of our functions is patrol officers, and that's about 150 vehicles and about 300 staff who perform security patrols across the country, mainly in capital cities, but some rural areas as well. As I said, we've got a fleet of about 150 vehicles. They work every night from roughly 10 or 11 hour shifts that go between 5 p.m. and about 6 a.m. And about 50% of our security officers are also our contractors as well. We made the decision very early on, and that was in conjunction with our National Operations Director, that we would treat our contractors in the safety space and in the safe driving space as we treat our employees. So when I talk about the programs that we have introduced and the activities that we undertake and the monitoring and the feedback that we do, our employees receive that, but our contractors also receive it.
And was that prior to you, was that applied before you started, or is that since you've actually came on board, that thinking?
Actually, I think it was pretty much before I started, because our software platform already had all our contractors loaded into it. So when I arrived, that was already in place. I came from another company, and there the legal team had told us that we had to be really careful, because by I suppose involving our contractors too closely in our safety programs, we were then making ourselves liable. But I think we have found, with such a high proportion of our workforce being contractors, that really, hand on heart, the only way to do what we think is the right thing is to apply the programs to our contractors and expect the contractors to comply with our programs, as do our employees. So I would now say that is my preferred approach, no question. But when I first arrived, I guess I hadn't really worked that way before, but I think it's definitely, in this space, the way that we work. And given we've got an isolated workforce, like none of our guys are under our direct supervision at any point in time. They come in and pick up their car and then off they go. And so because of that, your windows of opportunity to engage them and talk to them are quite short. So
and they're all single occupants, aren't they?
Beg your pardon, sorry?
And they're all out on their own? They're a single occupant when they're out?
Yes, yep. they're all isolated workers. And yeah, we have an isolated worker control called welfare checks, which continually monitor them through the night. And obviously that was one of the reasons we had the telematics in the cars, because that shows us where our drivers are. And so we do a welfare check on their phone, which they have to respond to and say, yes, I'm okay. But then if we don't get a welfare check responded to in time, then the very first thing we do is we go into the telematics and find out where their car is. And that gives us a bit of that then gives us next steps as to whether we need to get someone out there or call in emergency services or something. Yeah, so at any one time we've got 150 drivers moving around at night between isolated places and quite busy places, but some of them are remote rural roads, you know, where they're checking on dams and waterways and those sorts of things. They're on their own. So yeah. So yeah, as Jerome said, when I first started at the company, I thought I'd better do a gap analysis and try and do some risk profiling. And the very first thing I did was get the motor vehicle accident stats. And security officers are quite good at putting in reports because it's part of their job. So I never had to worry about whether I was actually getting the reports of the accidents. We had an online accident reporting scheme, and they were reporting the motor vehicle accidents, and I had data to look at. But when I went back and had a look at the data, we had 150 vehicles, and I counted up 132 crashes for the previous calendar year, which worked out that basically the company was crashing 83% of its vehicles in a calendar year. We also were not being, our motor vehicle insurer had refused to continue to insure us, and we were trying to find another motor vehicle insurer. Our service delivery was impacted. I noticed just anecdotally that speeding fines were just incurred by individuals and handed out, but there was no performance management of that. So there were a number of things that sort of rang alarm bells straight away. When I actually spoke to the managers and sort of said, hey guys, this doesn't look very good, I got some really interesting responses, included, you know, oh, well, these things happen. We've got cars, so you're going to have accidents. We drive our cars an average of 300 kilometres per security officer per night, so they're going to have accidents. The vehicles in the yard were dirty. They had dings in them. They were in very poor superficial condition. There was a high proportion of accidents that were caused by us. There was no mechanism for regular toolboxing or pre-shift briefs or driver training or educating. And I sort of anecdotally became aware that we were employing, although we did a license check before we employed a security officer, and we got his driving history that he had lost all his points wasn't a reason for us to not employ him, which shocked me somewhat. There were also, in terms of just systematic, there were no systems in place. So driver assessments were not done either pre-employment or post-incident. There was a driver assessment that could be done online, but again, nobody monitored it, and it was a very poor assessment anyway. There were no post.
So we're just getting a bit of, just lost you for a sec there, Claire. If you can just speak up a little. Sorry, Claire, if you can just speak up a little bit. We just lost you for a second there. Are you still there, Claire? Sorry about this, everyone. We tested this just yesterday and all worked perfectly fine.
Yep, I'm here now. I can hear you. Yep. Did we have a dropout, did we?
Just for a second. So please continue on.
All right. So we had a number of lack of systems in place as well. So that was obviously something that we needed to address. And most importantly, we didn't even know who our good drivers were, which I thought was a real concern, because how can you recognise or reward the right behaviours if you don't even know who those drivers are? Oh, hang on. I am.
And just when you're talking about that, Claire, so with that many vehicles, if you just click on the screen, that many vehicles being involved in instances, there must be a certain number which are always off the road, which must add a significant cost to your business as well.
Yes, so one of the sort of differences, and I actually haven't included in the later on in the sort of side advantages, was that each branch had to have at least 3 spare vehicles because they customarily had a couple of them off the road all the time. So most of the branches had 3 or 4 spare vehicles. At the moment, as far as I'm aware, they have none. And the reason I know that is because when I go and visit the different states or the different branches, they used to always have a spare car, even if it was pretty dinged up, that I could drive, whereas now they don't need to keep spare cars. So that was one of the better things from a cost perspective that has improved since we started focusing on that. So I basically looked at introducing a pretty comprehensive safe driving policy and procedure, which included support activities like pre-employment driver history and driver assessment prior to onboarding, face-to-face driver training rollout. Now, our insurer and a lot of insurance companies will offer you resources in this regard. They had a driver trainer and they provided to me free of charge, and we rolled out a face-to-face. It was a face-to-face program, but not practically oriented. It was classroom-based, and we did that over about 9 months nationally. Developed a suite of toolboxes, safe following distances, is it really faster to speed, night driving, distraction, kangaroos, and started to systematically roll those out on a fortnightly basis. I tried to make it a bit more interesting by supporting it with YouTube clips, Transport Accident Commission ads. For the management leadership and supervision team, I provided monthly statistical analysis and reporting, and obviously we did post-motor vehicle accident investigations and driver reassessments. We developed a fatigue management program, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. We had a really good communication and still have a really good communication software platform because, as I said, we have isolated workers. I can't get all these guys in the room at once. So we use that to talk. I use that to talk to them. So I would pose questions. I'd put a YouTube clip up and say, is it really faster to speed? Have a look at this calculation. Tell me what you think. I initially got quite a bit of pushback and resistance from the drivers along the lines of, we can't possibly drive safely because we're too busy doing our security work. Our security work is important, driving is not important. And so there was quite a bit of pushback. I think the reason I focused so much on the driving as a risk for us was I could see the potential for a fatality there. And that's what I was explaining to the drivers, is at the end of the day, I'm just trying to keep you safe and alive, and that's an important thing to do. So I also started tracking and performance managing driver infringements, and our safe driving policy included a process for that. So you can see where we've, these are the sort of snapshots I can get out of telematics. So I identified that we had telematics in the vehicles and that there seemed to be some information and reports I could get out of them. I was first interested in the speeding reports that I could get because they were, they had a lot of speeding in them. And that sort of caught my eye. So I went back and had a look at the research for telematics to confirm that there is a correlation between good driving scores as calculated by the telematics and less accidents, and also that you could use the speeding that came up in the telematics reports and provide that as feedback to drivers, and that it was a robust and rigorous measure to use for that. So once I'd confirmed to myself that the telematics were a really useful tool, I started playing around with using them as a lead indicator and for feedback. Started distributing driver and speeding event reports to the branch managers. And at first they sort of ignored them. And I remember having this conversation one day with one of the branch managers whose patrol officer had rear-ended the vehicle in front. And I said to the branch manager, because we were working through the investigation, you know, is he a good driver? Yes, he's a good driver. His telematics report here says that he has really high numbers of harsh braking. oh yes, but that doesn't make any difference to the fact that he's a good driver. Well, no, but he's just had a rear end. It would seem consistent that somebody who is a harsh braker is somebody who travels too close to the vehicle in front and then doesn't have time to react. And the manager was just silent. And I could hear that I'd sort of got him to start thinking. So I started measuring and reporting at the board level and also in the manager's supervisor reports, and started to see some improvement as in the driving and speeding events that I was seeing as that feedback got back to the drivers. So I started to get a bit more interest in it, and somebody said, oh, why don't you run a competition between the branches? So we decided to run a competition for the branch that had the highest safe driving scores over a month period, and just give out $25 gift vouchers or $50 gift vouchers to all the people in the winning branch. So I ran that a couple of times, and one particular branch was hilarious because when I ran it the first time, they rang up, they weren't the winners, and they said, do we qualify for the most improved award? And I said, oh, well, I don't have one, but I'll go and have a look. So I went back and had a look at the data. And yes, they had really rocketed up the charts and improved their performance. So I said, all right. So I went and saw the National Operations Director and said, can I have some more vouchers for the most improved award? Yeah, go for it, he said. So I did that. And then I ran another one because this one had seemed quite successful a couple of months later. And I got the same phone call. I got the manager ringing me up saying, hey, it's Kevin again. Do we qualify for the most improved award this time? And I said, but you qualified for it last time. He said, yeah, we qualified again. I went back and had a look, and what they'd jolly well done is as soon as the incentive period was over, they'd just dropped back to their old bad ways. And then as soon as I'd run the incentive again, they all suddenly improved. So I had to have a little chat to him and sort of say, look, you can't really qualify for the most improved award twice.
So I guess one of your goals would be, how do you keep that level up? Just a couple of questions have just slipped in, if that's all right. On those two charts there, Claire, what are those two measuring, if you don't mind me asking at the top? Danielle would like to know.
So this was literally a screenshot of my dashboard. So the one that I'm looking at down the bottom right-hand side is the harsh driving events. Okay, so that is actually telling me the top people for harsh driving events for the previous day. The one on the left shows the total idle time. I think the other one might show the time on site. So you can see where the blue, I'm pointing with nothing, where the blue horizontal bars are, that's showing the time that's spent at any one of our client sites. And I can't remember, and we'll have to answer you another time. The other one is fuel. I think it's fuel cost or fuel efficiency. So when you're using telematics, you can use it for, there's a lot of operational advantages to it, and then there's the safety advantage. We weren't using any of them. I started using them for safety, and I still tend to use them more than anyone else in the company, but you can certainly use them for fuel efficiency, track where your drivers are, maintenance and scheduling, and how much downtime your vehicles are having as well. So that's just the standard dashboard that I've got that I just took a screenshot of.
And what's the average age of your workforce and sex as well, if that's all right? Gender, I should say.
Oh, yep, no, gender's male. We've got very few in the patrol space. We've probably got about 4 women out of the 300. So, and obviously they're terrific drivers. And I don't ever have any trouble with that. What's the other question you asked? Oh yeah, I know the age. It's interesting. It's a double humped camel, and it's because we've got the old security guards who came from Chubb, and they're all in their early 50s, and they're white Caucasian males. And then the other sort of group that we've got are young new Australians who have got a university degree or are doing their university degree. So they're in their sort of late 20s, mid to late 20s. And certainly we see, we don't see real differences in the vehicle rates between those groups in terms of younger drivers, because The older drivers, I think, are more complacent and more embedded in, as I said, that they don't look on driving as part of their profession. They look on driving as something they do between their security jobs. So the accident rates are pretty consistent across both of those groups, but they probably have underlying different motivational causes. I think the younger ones, it's straight out inexperience. The older ones, driving is not something they've ever been taught or ever encouraged to really spend a lot of time on improving.
And how do you determine the root cause of some of the harsh events? It's just a question from Owen.
Well, any driver who consistently has high numbers of harsh events, we have a conversation with them. And I certainly had to do a fair bit of education around all you're doing here is having a chat, because there are, and I was explaining this to Jerome yesterday, there's an inherent variability in where these guys travel. So some of them travel on really, really rough gravel roads with really harsh corners, or they might have driveways that are really steep and then they have to accelerate quickly to get into a freeway. So there's an inequity in the type of run you've got. It's not always just level on a tarred road. So the first thing you do, and actually I didn't include it, I was going to include a snapshot. I'm just trying to remember. I can always send some snapshots through of the actual telematics reports, but it tells us exactly where the event happened and the time that the event happened. So you can actually sit down with your driver and you can say, here, you were at Smith Street, it was 3:30 in the morning and you braked harshly. Can you remember where that might have been? So then the next thing you could do is perhaps, hey, look, every night at 3:30, between 3:30 and 3:45 at Smith Street, you always brake harshly. So is there a geographical reason for that? So you might find there's a geographical reason, or you might find there's a skill-based reason or a habitual reason. So the first thing is to sit down and have a chat with the driver with the report, so you're looking exactly at what happened. The second thing is to get in the car with him. And certainly the branch managers who had the fastest improvement in scores were the guys who actually got in the car, and they actually coached our drivers to drive to get a good score. I've learnt a verbal line that I give people. I had someone recently in our sales team who was getting atrocious. Hey Nathan, let's have a bit of a chat about this. He was new to the team. Said, look, we measure and look at these all the time. We do that because we want to keep you safe. We do that because we know that you're less likely to have an accident if you have a good driver score. You've got a really atrocious score. It's showing that you're doing a lot of very sudden braking. Can you try and improve it by pretending that you're driving the Queen around holding a glass of champagne for a couple of days, and then I'll have a look at your score, and then if we still can't get it right, I'll go out in the car with you. So yeah, there are a number of root causes. They can be geographical, they can be habitual, they can be motivational, and you have to sit down and talk to the driver about them. And then if you can't get any success with that, it's a matter of getting in the car with them. And the other thing we found is people can't drive, they can't change their driving styles overnight. It's something that actually takes sort of over a month or so for them to change the habits.
And how do you measure sort of speed? Question from Mark around, is it GPS, car speed odometer, and how is harsh driving measured?
Okay, so the telematics, and I'd hate to say, I'm not saying I'm not a tech head, but I'm not a huge tech head. So what they've got is they've got a little black box in them, and inside that little black box, they've got a little, effectively a marble, and that then measures the actual acceleration. It's an accelerometer, so it'll measure the acceleration and the direction of that acceleration. And there are actually algorithms that all the telematics companies use to get consistent scores, because you would know that pretty much all the telematics companies will now offer these safe driving scores, as will your phone. So it's a similar movement sensor to and direction sensor to what your phone's got, but it's actually a little black box with a little marble in it, and you can also change the settings depending on the sort of vehicle that you're driving. But in terms of the consistency of the data and the rigor and validity and reliability of the data, I understand that is all set by standards, and that's also set by the algorithms that they all use that are similar. We changed telematics providers. When did we do that? 2016. We went from TomTom to Verizon, and we found, although it wasn't apples with apples, a poor scorer in TomTom was still a poor scorer in Verizon. So they measure, Verizon doesn't have speed measurement in it, whereas TomTom does. And I would actually always recommend that you use one with a speed measure. TomTom also gave you immediate alerts in the vehicle when you had an event. Verizon doesn't do that, and I miss that as well. But Verizon has a much stronger focus on fuel economy, which could be handy.
So just touching on that, when you're talking around immediate notice if someone's been in a crash, because this question that Mike was asking about here. So if one of your drivers is involved in a crash, is there immediate notification if there's been high deceleration, or does it go through to head office, or can they use it if they see someone else who's involved in a crash?
Yeah, they can't. It does. We don't get a notification for crashes, and we can't always get even an event, a harsh driving event. We might if he braked suddenly, but we don't always. There are ways. We don't use them, but my branch managers do. They can message people in the cars at the time using the telematics. It's got a messaging function. So I suppose you could potentially use that to communicate about an accident. Don't know.
Great. Thanks, Claire.
Okay. So our early results, we had a 50% reduction in the first 12 months in our motor vehicle accidents. We had a good reduction in our all driving events measure. You can sort of see there were a lot, but that was 50%. We significantly reduced over time and focus our speeding hours. And you can also see that 2012, 2013, as I said, was a very high cost year for us in terms of motor vehicle accidents. And we subsequently then reduced it back down to something that was similar to the preceding years. So we had the problem with motor vehicle average claims costs as an indicator. It's a lag indicator, and there's a significant amount of luck in there as well. So it's not my main driver. Okay, so we started playing around. There was no doubt that the telematics and the safe driving scores worked really well as to generate interest for our drivers in what was going on. So we started with the branch incentive program, but we found that we didn't involve all the drivers. So then we decided to go with an individual incentive program. So we ran, I think the first one was in 2015. It ran for 12 weeks. It was all contractors, all employees. They had to score an average score of 8 or above over that 12 weeks. They had to meet a baseline number of kilometres and have no at-fault accidents and no infringements to qualify for a $100 gift voucher. So the first time we ran it in 2015, we had 26 of our 300 drivers eligible. We then ran them back to back. You can see from April, July, then we had 28, December 15, we had 32, March 16 was our fourth program, we had 57, and then we stopped for a while because I was concerned that it was going to actually become a right, I suppose, and not a reward, and I was a bit concerned about that. So we had a bit of a break from it for a while, and the last one we then ran another one last year in September, October, November, and 82 of our drivers actually qualified for the incentive. You can also see that over that same period, we improved our average, continue to improve our average driver scores and reduce our percentage of at-fault incidents by the drivers who qualified reduced the percentage of at-fault incidents over the whole fleet, I should say, not just that.
So that's great. So even when you stop the gamification component, I guess with
Yes.
the incentives, you still saw continuous improvement.
Yes. Yep. So, but we were still also focusing on the scores and sending out feedback on the scores. Then in 2017, or maybe late 2016, one of the branch managers said to me, you should run a competition among the branches again. So we went from originally 2 branch incentive programs, then 4 back-to-back individual incentive programs. And the reason I did that was to try and involve people on the individual basis who didn't have branch managers who were on the journey or engaged in it. So now I thought, time to go back to the branch competition kind of angle. So that's when we developed our league ladder, where we actually, on a weekly basis, we publish who's doing the best, basically. So here you can see our 3rd of June to the 9th of June league ladder, which shows that Richmond and Regency Park both had average scores of 90. So originally we started with TomTom and their score was out of 10. We're now with Verizon, their score is out of 100, but the same principles apply. So we're looking for above 90 scores. And you can see that a lot of the teams have actually given themselves nicknames. So there's the Tassie Devils there on the left, the Tonsley Titans, Thunderbirds and Redbacks. So that league ladder did a great job in, I suppose, engaging all the branches in the competition and overall improving our score. There's a lot of friendly rivalry. About halfway down there, there's one called Tonsley Park. Tonsley Park and Tullamarine, where are they? They're there somewhere. Continue to furiously compete for a long time, the 2 managers there, and see. And we're really, you know, who's on top this week? We got lots of discussion that way as well. So the league ladder then revitalised things and made everybody a lot more interested in it. And by doing so, it got some of our lower scoring branches basically joining in because everybody else was in it. And that contributed to an overall improvement in our average driver scores over 2017, 2018.
Well, that's a fantastic trend line.
Yeah, no. Well, the other interesting thing about that one was we were looking for up, up and up. But a few months ago, we started to get close to an average of 90. And I started to get anecdotal reports of some less desirable behaviours creeping in. And unfortunately, I've seen no evidence. 85% is our KPI. But I haven't seen anything that says that somebody who scores has less accidents than someone who scores 85. But
can you just repeat that? Sorry.
I haven't got any. Haven't got any evidence that somebody who scores 92 has less accidents than someone who scores 85. But I was also getting some anecdotal evidence that some guys, in an effort to get a score above 90, were cruising through red lights so that they didn't have a harsh braking score. So I started to worry about some of the behaviours that getting a score of 90 was driving. You know, they say be careful what you measure. And certainly consistent average safe driving scores around 85 were correlating with reduced accidents for us. But I wasn't sure that by focusing on trying to get 90 and above 90 was getting a commensurate improvement again. So we've sort of backed off a bit, and we're now, yeah, go on.
Is there much of a risk of people tampering the technology? Because quite a few questions have popped up asking, is there a way people can manipulate it, play with it, and then it ties in nicely to what you're inadvertently creating at the same time?
Look, there mustn't be much of a way that they can manipulate it, because they would have. What they used to do with TomTom, they used to put a code in which identified them as a driver. And then they had to sign out. And because a lot of guys forgot to sign out, if you jumped in the car after somebody who was a good driver or a bad driver, according to the scores, you would then come out with their score. So I had quite a bit of firefighting in my incentive program in the early years, when you could clearly see Joe Bloggs, good score, good score, good score, good score, sudden bad score for 3 shifts that he hadn't logged out and someone else had logged in. Someone else was driving it under his log on, but driving it a lot more poorly. And the way I could fix that was go back and say to the branch manager, okay, show me who was rostered on. So we were finding with TomTom there was a real issue because they could drive under somebody else's login if that person didn't log out, or if they or if they logged in as that person. But Verizon have a fob system, and we issue 1 fob per driver. And I must say that we haven't had that problem since we used the Verizon and the fob, and they haven't found any other way to manipulate it, I don't think, because I just haven't identified it.
Do you get many disputes with drivers at all? Do you get many disputes with drivers at all? Like when they say I wasn't speeding or issues like that pop up?
No. I think because we generally do pull up the report. There's a detailed report that you can run which shows virtually every minute that they've spent and where they were. And now they clock on to the sites using their phone. So a combination of their phone and the GPS will give us a pretty good indication of where people have been, what they've been doing. So no, there's no dispute. And I don't think you can tamper with it. If somebody can send me a message with a way of tampering it, maybe it's happening and I don't know about it. But normally you find out. Normally,
you're looking for.
Yeah, you get some inequities somewhere and you start going, what's going on? And I do remember we had it with TomTom, but we haven't had it with Verizon. So in terms of our fatigue program, we obviously also had to pay attention to fatigue. When I first spoke to one of our senior managers, he said to me, well, we don't drive trucks, so fatigue's not an issue. And I can remember thinking, oh, okay, not sure about that. But at one of the managers' meetings, I said I'd like to form a fatigue working group to do some work here. And we got together. This is one of those teams that just really gelled. And the first thing one of the guys said to me is we should run a survey, which I hadn't thought of, actually. And one of my bylines along the way is none of these have been my ideas. They've mostly been other people's ideas. I've just put them into practice. And so I ran a fatigue survey, and we had a really good response rate. We had a 75% response rate. And in it, we identified 50% of our drivers said they were getting less than 5 hours sleep pre-shift. And that's enough to say we've got a problem here. So I then was able to take that to the CEO and go, we've got a problem here. We need to address it with the campaigns, some resources, et cetera, et cetera. So in the survey, I also included a page for them to write things that they do to fatigue, because when you talk to a lot of these night workers, they have a lot of interesting things to say about what they do. One guy I remember always telling me that he used to use carrots and celery because it's crunchy, and he found that really helped in terms of the crunchiness, helped keep him alert, and it also wasn't heavy food that kept him sort of weighed down at night as well. So I developed a fatigue booklet with all the tips that these guys had put in the survey. We also had one of the members of our fatigue working party was a patrol officer who'd actually gone to sleep at the wheel, crashed into a bus and ruptured his spleen. And he wrote me an email saying why he was so passionate about fatigue. And I actually then turned that into a letter, which I included with the fatigue booklet, as well as sleep masks, earplugs, and a little do not disturb sign. I originally wanted to, and I was speaking to Jerome about this yesterday, I still think it's an opportunity for us. Anecdotally, I heard a story of a patrol officer whose father had died, and he was going over in the daytime because his mother would ring him up and say, can you take me shopping? Can you mow the lawn? Can you do all these things your dad used to do? Because as far as she was concerned, he worked at night. So he was available in the day to do any chores that she needed doing. So there's a real education piece, I believe, around families of shift workers and night shift workers to say, hey, listen, just because he's home doesn't mean he can do all your jobs, which is why I included this little do not disturb sign in the fatigue packs and said to the guys, you know, hang this on the door, tell your neighbours, tell the people surrounding you that you're a night worker and that you need to sleep in the daytime. and talk to your kids, because your kids need to understand that if you don't get your sleep during the daytime, then daddy might not be around. So we have spent a lot of time on fatigue and continue to try and reinvent the messages with that. We have quite a high changeover of staff because we've got so many contractors. So there's a fair bit of repetition in what we do, but we have to try and keep it fresh for the guys who've heard it several times already. So we gave out the booklet. We also included some information on an app at that time, which was quite good, called Sleep Time. And we rolled out a series of sleep webinars by Dr. Carmel Harrington as toolboxes, and they were extremely well received.
She's
so in
engaging.
terms of results, yeah, she's great. She's a great speaker. And yeah, her webinars were really good. We still have them, and I'll probably run them again at some stage. So in terms of results, when I first started, we had high numbers of actual injuries occurring because our motor vehicle accidents were a lot more severe. And obviously we had people being hurt. Over time, we've managed to drive those down and to retain that, so that although we still have quite high frequencies, they're much lower impact injuries. They're low speed, they tend to be on the client sites, and they're sort of dings and bings and stuff. So our injuries and our potential for injuries looks good. That's the, if you look over to the right there, and it's probably too small for people to see, that is an actual safe driving report for somebody. So you can see it's for Nathan, and you can see there that it tells you the time and it tells you the location and what the actual event was. I don't know if you can see my mouse pointing at that, but yeah, that's the, I can send through an example of a report if anyone wants to see, and then I'll black out the person's name.
Do you tie that into the performance review of your employees as well?
Yes, because and that was another thing, was driving was not seen as part of the job, whereas now driving is definitely part of the job. And so part of the safe driving policy and procedure that I did was actually and you're going to have a formal discussion at this point, and you're going to have a formal discussion at this point, because there was nothing sort of structured around that. But as I said, it starts out initially with, why do you think this is? And then I need you to improve it. And then I'm going to get in the car with you to teach you how to improve it. And then over time, well, we haven't had anybody over time who's continued to have low scores. We don't accommodate that. They can't keep driving for us if they can't get a good driver score. Most of them seem to have just improved anyway.
I just need you to speak up a little bit, thanks, Claire.
One of the sort of, oh, sorry, yep. So they've improved. We haven't had anybody who has not been able to improve their driver's score but has continued to drive with us. It's possible. It's a skill that anybody can learn how to do, and they do. We also had some additional benefits that the finance people liked a lot and the operational people liked a lot. And that was, we significantly reduced our tyre wear and tear and our maintenance costs and brake pads. So this was not something I was even, and you'll notice I put no stats there because I don't capture that data. But I was told anecdotally by one of the guys that he used to have to replace tyres on a monthly basis, and now he just only has to replace them every 4 months. And the other thing that I haven't talked about is it's a real opportunity if we're looking at this data, and our branch managers get these reports every Monday morning, as I do. I create the overall league ladder, but they can use it to have a look through, particularly anyone who's got a low score. And what we identified through investigating an incident with one of our Canberra drivers was when we went and had a look at her safe driving scores, we noticed that she deteriorated about 2 o'clock in the morning, quite significantly. And it was a pattern every time, every night. So when we sat down and talked to her, it turned out that she had a child with some disabilities. So she was actually working at night and then staying awake during the day. And because fatigue manifests as physical decrease in coordination over time. You can actually see somebody who's not sleeping effectively. You can see that once they get to either their 17-hour, post 17 hours, or to a period that their fatigue or their sleep debt is starting to kick in, their harsh driving and their harsh cornering and their jerky acceleration in the vehicle starts to make their score deteriorate. The other thing you can see with that is anybody who's struggling mentally, thinking about other things, distracted, their scores will also deteriorate as well. So if you keep an eye on your driver scores and actually look at the patterns, you will start to see and proactively identify other problems, either from a general fatigue perspective or a general health perspective as well.
And is there a lot of work required in monitoring that data?
Look, we've got 150 vehicles, so that's 150. If you had a fleet of, I don't know, how many does Australia Post have? Because I didn't look at it when I was at Post because I think it was just too huge. There were too many vehicles. And it's certainly, when I spoke to Toll about their monitoring of telematics, there is an administrative review process in there. That being said, the dashboards, the summaries, and the overall scores give you quick ways of monitoring it. And then what you do is dive into the outliers. So how much time does it, how much time do the 300 to the 150 vehicles for me on a weekly basis? Half an hour. For a branch manager who's got probably about 11 or 12 vehicles in his branch, probably about the same. If you're looking at follow-up, half an hour to an hour, because he's got to actually do follow-up. So it depends. I'd probably apply those sort of ratios if you had a bigger fleet in terms of the workload involved. But yeah, the telematics providers have got better at giving you dashboard and summary data that's very easily manipulated and that you can very easily dump into spreadsheets with pivot charts that will calculate outliers for you. So, learnings, where are we now? Unfortunately, I thought that you could just set and forget this stuff, but you can't. You have to keep the focus on. You've got to continually sort of mix it up and do things that are a bit different. So we're going back and we've been focusing on the league ladder for the last 12 months, but we're going back to running an incentive program for 12 weeks. I've decided we'll do that from September through till December, because incentive programs are quite well validated in the literature, and it will then give people a voucher just before Christmas. So I thought timing wise that was probably a good way to do it.
That's a good idea.
We've also still been, sorry, go on.
That's a great idea. I think that's a real incentive in building that in. I think the whole gamification, working with your employees, it's a fan, and then going into your branches. It's very creative in how you actually moved it all forward.
Thank you. Yeah, no, well, I think you've got to make it interesting for people and got to make it interesting for yourself. And I think telematics are a great tool to do that. People like a score, and of course it's feedback as well. And it's a great way of, I think the frustration for me was always with driving, and I had the same thing at Post, is you can't always be there to see how they're driving. So telematics will give you an extra tool for you both to give feedback to the driver, but also gives him a score and something to compete with as well. We talked yesterday, Jerome, about senior leadership commitment, and certainly that's been a really critical part of all this. I had a new national operations director who joined the company about the same time as I did. He'd had worked in other places where there'd been a fatality. He was absolutely committed to safety. I think when he started, it was just very general, I'm committed to safety, everybody be safe. But over time, this program has taught him and me how to be more specific about the behaviours that we want from people, how to measure those, and then how to provide feedback and talk to people about those behaviours. And that's then become a more visible demonstration of leadership commitment, which I think has been really useful. So he's CC'd into the league ladder each week. If he sees a branch that's going really well, if he sees a branch that's suddenly dropping their bundle, he'll come over the top and say, hey, what's going on here? Or well done to this group. The same thing at the moment. I think he's just organised now, and this is an example of him taking ownership of it, for the bottom 10 drivers' scores each week to be sent through to him for follow-up. And he's got an admin assistant that is working for me to give him that information direct so he can do the follow-up, which is why I barely know about it. But that's the kind of leadership commitment and follow-up you want.
Does the leadership team do they have a brand as well? Do they have a motto? Are they monitored?
They're monitored. Now, that's where it all gets very interesting. While I actually took a career break, and while I was out of the business, I noticed that all of the managers and supervisors' scores were removed from the branch scores and put in separate reports, which I wasn't terribly happy about. And I haven't redressed that yet, but I look at them and I actually follow them up. To me, it was really quite surprising the number of supervisors who actually thought, or managers who thought, that it was okay for them to monitor their staff, but they did not have to lead by example. And actually, that's one. I have a particular manager who has always sped, always, and I've been speaking to him now for 5 years, and it's taken 5 years for him to actually start to come back to me and go, what did you think of my score this week? So behaviour change with some people is really, really slow. It's my response to that. He's in a different area of the operations, but he's got a work car, so I can see how he's driving. That's pretty much it from me.
Well, I've got a mountain of questions here. There's been a lot sort of flying in, so we can dive into some of these. And
right.
Just a quick one. Do you monitor seatbelts?
I can't with the current telematics that I have. But I was talking to somebody in the telematics space, and because telematics can link in with pretty much the whole engine, it is possible to get seatbelts monitoring telematics, and I would if I could.
Okay. So on the to-do list.
Yeah.
Another question here. You mentioned kangaroos. That's a risk for staff. What's the crux of your recommendations on how to actually engage and make them safe around kangaroos? Thanks, Clive.
Oh, Clive, welcome to my nightmare. Well, first of all, I was saying to Jerome yesterday that we've had like a 30% increase in through frequency hits over the past year, and I'm blaming the drought. That being said, what we have done is, and I'm happy to hear from anyone else on the group who's got a better idea, is we actually identify our ROO hotspots, and then we specifically say to the guys, you've got to wash off 10 to 20 K speed. So I got a ROO hit notification this morning from Queensland. We've got a branch up at Ipswich and it's having a terrible time with ROOs. And the first thing they said was, yes, it's an 80K speed limit, and yes, he was driving 60 Ks. And because I've got telematics, I can go back and check that as well. So yeah, that's all that and lighting. Actually, we've put spotlights on most of the vehicles that we've got that are driving through poor lighting. So we had some areas in Canberra where the visibility was very poor. So we put spotlights on and we get them to wash off 10 to 20 K speed. And they're the only two things that we really feel can assist.
Growing up in the bush, I totally understand that one, the joys of kangaroos.
Yep.
Question from Daniel. Is there any threshold of cumulative, struggle that word, traffic infringements within a period of time that an SXP would consider not to appoint a security officer?
Oh my goodness! I think if we had somebody come in applying for a job with us and he had two two traffic infringements, I'd say don't employ him. And that's, I mean, that's in the last few years. I mean, if he had two when he was 18, but if he had them in the last year or two, absolutely, I'd say don't employ him.
Naz has a good question here, just talking on the gamification. How do you normalise the variation in conditions between the driver and the rural, metro, and some of those hilly sort of areas?
We can't. That's the problem, and that's why. And we've had a lot of discussion with this, and a lot of discussion with the patrol officers too, who've said that it's unfair, and that's why our benchmark was 8 out of 10, and our benchmark score is now 85. I'll see with this incentive program, but if somebody comes to me and says, this is my run, it's a shocker of a run because it's got ups and downs and blind corners and all these kinds of things. But if you look at my score, I've consistently had 88 all the way through. I think I qualify for an incentive. I would go and talk to the manager about it, and if the manager agreed that it was a really tricky run and that they thought that the person had a good approach to it, I'd probably offer the incentive. It's not 100% black and white, and I've had people before come to me. So no, you can't make it apples with apples because it's so geographically variable, but you can certainly talk to people about it.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. So what about with mobile phones? Can you link that into the telematics, and are people allowed to use them whilst they're driving?
Oh, they're not allowed to use them while they're driving. And that's a problem for us, like it's a problem, I think, for any business, partly because our guys, they're alone at night. A lot of them come from overseas, so they often ring up their mates and chat to their mates while they're driving. And so, yeah, I reckon with time, you could probably get a telematic that would detect the interference. I think it would, but I don't have that at the moment. And I would say, yes, distraction, use of mobile phones, and kangaroos are the two things that I feel that we are controlling the least in terms of our hazards at the moment.
One here from Wei. Do the driver scores, cards, reporting get emailed to individual drivers periodically as well?
Yes, all of them, their reports. Some of the branch managers have set it up, and they can have their report emailed the next morning. It can actually get emailed while they're driving, and you can set it up so they get text messages while they're driving. But you just heard me, and I don't want them to get text messages while they're driving. So we're not using that part of the technology. But quite a few of the branch managers have set up for the guys to get their own reports the following morning, so they're getting immediate feedback. I liked TomTom's functionality where it gave an audible alarm. It wasn't an offensive one, but it went beep, and then you knew you'd had an event. And I've had anecdotally quite a few drivers say to me that they really liked that. They found it really helped keep them on their game, just that brief audible sound. And certainly if I was going for another provider at some point, I would revert to having that. The two things I miss from Verizon are the speed, although Verizon are now introducing that, the actual speed limits that are linked to speed limits that are obtained via satellite, and also the audible alarms. But yeah, the reports going via email to the patrol officers the next morning, quite a few of them have told me that they really like that and that they check their own performance from that.
Great. And we've got some wonderful little resources that people were sent through as well as what if, so we can share them. One talking about New Transport New South Wales has a new free iPhone app for the purpose of alerts regards to speeding for people. And yep, I'll include that link when we send this out. So it's great. I'm just mindful of time now. We're coming up towards the very end. Lots of other questions here, so I do apologise if I didn't get them all asked, but there's been a lot has poured in. We've actually got a lot of positive feedback from people as well. So congratulations to our presenter for sharing, initiating, introducing drivers, and mostly improving the driving award along the way. So Claire, last thing, have a closing comment you'd like to leave at all?
Probably not, except I've enjoyed it immensely. It's been a really interesting program to be to be part of. And the other thing that I said right at the beginning is when I went back and had a look at where we started and the sorts of things that were said to me by the managers and the patrol officers when we started versus the kind of messages that I get now, I go, wow, that's cultural change. It's actually happened. Now, as a company, we take driving safety seriously. Everybody knows that. It's consistently applied, and that is reflected in our language and in our symbols and the way that we go about our business. And I'm very proud of that. And that's not only me, that's the people, that's everyone in the company.
Well, proof's in the pudding, and fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time to share your story as well.
It's okay, I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
And thank you to all our audience who've joined in for us today. And as always, we'll have more things up and coming over the coming months. Please make sure you register for our newsletter to be kept up to date. And we even have a bit of an ADVI hypothetical webinar next week, web panel looking at data and the rise of connected autonomous vehicles. So thank you all again for dialing in and your interactive questions, and I look forward to chatting with you next time. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, see ya.